Rick Harrison once built a business that grew into a cultural phenomenon. Today, that foundation is cracking, fracture by fracture. Pawn Stars faded off the air in 2025 without a formal farewell or explanation from the History Channel. His son, Cory, publicly dismissed the show as manufactured and chose to leave the United States behind, relocating permanently to Mexico. At the same time, Rick's own mother has taken him to court, accusing him of transferring millions of dollars while she lay unconscious in a hospital bed. In the span of just a few years, Rick lost his father, became entangled in legal conflict with his mother, and watched his relationship with his son unravel. Now he's attempting a comeback through a project called Pawn Stars 2.0. But according to industry insiders, this revival is less about reinvention and more about survival, an effort to stay afloat as financial pressure closes in. To understand how Rick Harrison arrived here, the story has to go back to the beginning. He was born on March 27, 1965, in Lexington, North Carolina, into a family already shaped by discipline and loss. His father, Richard Benjamin Harrison Jr., carried himself with the rigid structure of a career Navy man. His mother, Joanne Rue Harrison, worked quietly to keep the household steady. Rick also had an older sister, Sherry, but she died at just 6 years old. Her death left an absence that never fully healed, a silence that settled over the family and lingered through the years that followed. In 1967, when Rick was only 2, the Navy reassigned his father to San Diego. The family packed up once again and moved west. That relocation marked the beginning of a childhood defined by motion. Boxes were unpacked and repacked. New neighborhoods replaced old ones before they could feel familiar. Each move meant different classrooms, different classmates, and the constant need to adapt. Stability was never guaranteed, and Rick learned early how to adjust quickly, even when he didn't have a choice. By the time he was 8, life introduced a new challenge, one far harder to outrun. That was when the seizures began. Roughly once a month, his body would betray him without warning. The aftermath could be brutal. His muscles ached so severely that he sometimes remained bedridden for days. While other children played outside, Rick lay in dark rooms, waiting for the pain to fade. Time kept moving forward without him, taking with it chances to socialize, to feel normal, to simply be a kid. But in those long stretches of isolation, something unexpected took hold. He started reading. One book led to another, and soon reading became more than a distraction. It became a refuge. Rick would later say that books saved his life. They filled the silence, kept his mind active, and offered him purpose when his body refused to cooperate. Among those books was a series called The Great Brain. There were 10 volumes, and Rick read every one. The story followed Tom Fitzgerald, a sharp-minded boy in Utah who always seemed to have a scheme ready. Rick was drawn to the way Tom analyzed situations, spotted opportunities, and pushed forward even when plans fell apart. Somewhere in those pages, Rick began to recognize parts of himself. He started thinking differently about money, leverage, and how problems could be broken down and solved. The stories taught him to see obstacles as puzzles and ambition as something that needed to be balanced with consequences. In a childhood where so much felt out of his control, those stories offered direction. Still, the pain and frustration were real. By 14, Rick had started smoking marijuana, chasing a temporary escape from the pressure he felt. His parents responded quickly, sending him to rehab that same year. The days were structured and unforgiving. Counselors spoke bluntly about risk, addiction, and the cost of bad decisions. It wasn't easy, but sitting in those rooms forced Rick to confront himself. He began to understand that choices accumulate, that shortcuts always carry a price, and that discipline wasn't punishment. It was a tool he would need if he wanted a future worth building. School, however, continued to slip away. His seizures caused him to miss so much class time that catching up became nearly impossible. By 9th or 10th grade, he made the decision to leave. It wasn't an act of failure. Schools in the late 1970s simply weren't equipped to support students with conditions like his. Life had already pushed him onto a different road, and Rick didn't hesitate to start moving down it. By the early 1980s, he was in Las Vegas, working swap meets and learning the rhythms of the hustle. He became the first teenager in the city known for selling counterfeit Gucci bags. He sourced them from New York's Chinatown for around $10 each and sold them for nearly $100. On a good weekend, he could clear $2,000. For a teenager, it was transformative. He experienced the rush of turning opportunity into income and learned firsthand that profitable markets never stay uncontested. When cheaper imports from Asia flooded in and cut into his margins, Rick didn't stop. He pivoted. He drove to Los Angeles' garment district, and found another angle: fake Jordache jeans. Buying them for $15 and selling them for 40 or 50 brought the money back. That ability to change course instead of quitting became part of who he was. Around the same time, his personal life shifted dramatically. His girlfriend, Kim, became pregnant when Rick was 17. They suffered an early loss, then welcomed their son, Cory, on April 27, 1983, just days after Rick turned 18. He chose to marry Kim, and in Las Vegas, their youth made the marriage a topic of local conversation. 2 years later, they had another son, Adam. But the strain of raising children so young, combined with Rick's relentless drive to hustle, took its toll. By 1985, the marriage ended. Rick took custody of both boys, a responsibility that intensified everything. Now, every risk carried more weight. 2 lives depended on him. Then came the moment that reset the entire Harrison family. In April 1981, a real estate collapse in Kentucky erased everything Rick's parents had worked for. They were left with just $5,000, money that had to cover the move, rent, food, and whatever future they could piece together. With little else to fall back on, they headed for Las Vegas, hoping the city might offer another chance. At the time, Las Vegas was harsher and smaller, far removed from the polished tourist destination it would later become. The Harrisons arrived without connections, without certainty, and without guarantees, only the belief that starting over was better than standing still. But within weeks of arriving, the family took their first real step forward. They opened the Gold and Silver Coin Shop, a cramped, 300-square-foot space with barely enough room for customers to turn around. Rick worked the counter during the day and repossessed cars at night. Some days, the shop didn't even clear $100. Still, they unlocked the door every morning. Survival depended on consistency. At the time, Las Vegas operated under an unusual restriction. The city had frozen new pawn shop licenses until the population reached 250,000. In 1981, Las Vegas sat at roughly 25,000 residents. City officials believed it would take decades to reach the threshold. Rick refused to accept that timeline. Every single week, he called the city statistician, tracking population growth by hand. He waited like this for 8 years. In April of 1989, the number finally crossed 250,000. Rick moved immediately. He rushed to City Hall and secured the license. That moment altered the family's trajectory. The Gold and Silver Pawn Shop opened that same month at 713 Las Vegas Boulevard. It was still modest in size, but it was official, and it belonged to them. Within the first year, the shop turned a profit. By the mid-1990s, it had become a recognizable fixture in the neighborhood, growing one transaction at a time. As the years passed, the numbers kept climbing. By 2005, the shop was issuing roughly $3 million in loans annually. The average loan ranged between $75 and $150. Interest income alone reached around $700,000 a year. Thousands of transactions passed through the counter, from broken chains and loose stones to rare collectibles and historical artifacts. The climb was extraordinary when measured against where they started: $5,000, no connections, and a single chance to rebuild. Rick Harrison wasn't just building a business. He was trying to change perception. Pawn shops, in his view, deserved to be seen as legitimate marketplaces, not shadowy last resorts. In 2003, a brief appearance on Insomniac with Dave Attell gave the shop a flicker of exposure. Rick held on to that moment. He began approaching production companies repeatedly, pitching an idea centered on a real family, a real shop, and real transactions. His vision was straightforward: education, entertainment, and authenticity in equal measure. The original working title was Pawning History. Someone at Left Field Pictures suggested something shorter, sharper. Pawn Stars stuck. The wordplay was simple, memorable, and approachable. After years of persistence, the History Channel finally agreed. On July 19, 2009, Pawn Stars aired its first episode. That broadcast marked a turning point. Rick's refusal to quit didn't just launch a show, it reshaped how millions of viewers understood the pawn industry. The series gained momentum almost immediately. By January 2011, a single episode drew 7 million viewers, becoming the most-watched telecast in the network's history at that time. That same year, it ranked as the second highest-rated reality show in the United States, averaging 7.6 million viewers per episode, trailing only Jersey Shore. Audiences connected with the formula. History blended with humor. Business collided with family tension. That balance carried the show far beyond American television. It aired in more than 150 countries and was translated into 38 languages. What began as a local business story became a global cultural presence. As the show exploded, the pawn shop transformed with it. Before Pawn Stars, the store welcomed roughly 70 to 100 customers a day. By 2010, that number jumped to over 1,000. By 2013, it exceeded 5,000 daily visitors. The shop became a Las Vegas destination, part business, part tourist landmark. To manage the crowds, Rick opened an express pawn counter and hired nearly 30 additional employees. He invested around $400,000 to expand and remodel the showroom, growing it to approximately 15,000 square feet. Even with the added space, filming rules required the main cast to step away from the counter when cameras were rolling, ensuring customer privacy. The operation never slowed. The crowds kept coming. The chemistry behind the counter was central to the show's longevity. 3 generations worked side by side, each bringing a distinct presence. Richard Harrison, known simply as the Old Man, served as the sharp-eyed authority until his retirement in 2017. Rick stood at the center, having learned the business since he was 13. Cory, nicknamed Big Hoss, started working at 9 and eventually took on the role of manager. Austin Russell, better known as Chum Lee, joined at 21, adding humor and unpredictability that softened the sharper edges of the family dynamic. The tension between Rick and Cory, the jokes aimed at Chum Lee, and the generational clashes felt authentic because they were. That shared history kept audiences engaged for more than a decade. The cameras also captured some of Rick's boldest transactions. One of the most striking moments came when he paid $250,000 for 12 original illustrations for Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are. Created in the mid-1960s, the drawings were rare artifacts of children's literature. Rick appeared visibly stunned as he finalized the deal, admitting on camera that he couldn't believe he was spending that much. Still, he understood exactly what he was holding. Another major purchase involved a silver collection weighing 3,372 ounces, acquired for $111,000. Rick explained that silver's value extends beyond aesthetics. It's essential to modern technology, running through phones, computers, and televisions as the most efficient conductor of electricity. With silver trading between $25 and $30 an ounce, the collection carried both material worth and industrial demand. Then there was the 1932 Lincoln Roadster. Rick paid $95,000 for one of just 112 ever produced. It was an engineering icon of its era, capable of reaching around $170,000 at auction. He saw more than a car. He saw scarcity, craftsmanship, and future value. He also purchased a Les Paul guitar for $90,000, another calculated risk rooted in history, condition, and market demand. Each deal reflected the same mindset Rick had carried since his earliest hustles, the ability to recognize value, move decisively, and trust his understanding of the market. The Les Paul guitar carried a story that elevated it far beyond a typical vintage instrument. It had once belonged to Mary Ford, the wife and musical partner of Les Paul himself. That direct connection to one of the architects of modern electric guitar history transformed it into something rare and irreplaceable. For Rick, it wasn't just an object. It was living history, a tangible link to the origins of an entire sound. Not every item, however, could follow him home. One proposal stood apart for its sheer scale. The Robosaurus loomed 45 feet tall, weighed 31 tons, and breathed fire like a mechanical beast. The asking price was $1 million. Cory joked that it was slightly out of reach. The piece was less a product than a spectacle, but its appearance on the show became unforgettable. One of those moments that lingered in viewers' memories long after the episode ended. Away from the showroom lights, Rick's personal life unfolded through a series of marriages, each reflecting a different chapter of his journey. His first marriage began in 1982, when he was only 17. He married Kim Harrison while she was pregnant with their son, Cory. Their second son, Adam, arrived in 1983. The marriage ended in 1985. Both were young, unprepared, and pulled in different directions. Kim later said Rick prioritized work over home life, and over time, the distance between them grew until communication nearly disappeared. Decades later, tragedy struck. Adam died in January 2024 at the age of 39 from a fentanyl overdose. In the aftermath, Rick spoke publicly about the opioid crisis, using his platform to warn others about its devastating reach. Rick married again in 1986, this time to Tracy Harrison. Their marriage lasted 25 years and produced one son, Jake. Tracy remained largely out of the public eye, but court records revealed a slow separation shaped by Rick's constant filming and endless hours at the shop. The distance became permanent. They divorced quietly in 2011, without public conflict. Jake maintained a close relationship with both parents and eventually carved out his own role connected to the show. In 2013, Rick married Deanna Burden in Laguna Beach, with Danny Coker officiating the ceremony. Through that marriage, Rick became a stepfather to Deanna's 3 daughters, Serena, Tiana, and Marissa. The marriage lasted until 2020. Court filings described a widening gap in lifestyles and outlooks that made reconciliation impossible. The split was settled privately. Rick later told TMZ the decision was mutual and confirmed that he remained connected to her daughters even after the divorce. His 4th marriage followed in 2021 when he wed Amanda Palmer. It lasted less than 2 years. There were few public details, no visible disputes, and little media attention. By 2023, the marriage ended quietly, fading from view almost as quickly as it began. Then, in March 2025, Rick announced a new engagement. He revealed that he was set to marry Angie Palashkin, a registered nurse from Las Vegas. They had begun dating in early 2024 and, according to Rick, had never fought. He proposed at a winery in Casablanca, Chile, presenting a 6.5-carat pear-shaped diamond ring sourced from his own pawn shop. He openly admitted uncertainty about signing a prenuptial agreement, despite never having used one before. Rick said he still believed marriage should last forever, even while acknowledging that life doesn't always cooperate. The engagement came shortly after the loss of his son Adam, blending grief and hope into a single moment. Years earlier, another shock had rattled the Pawn Stars universe. On March 9, 2016, what began as a routine day in Las Vegas ended with police arriving at Austin Chumlee Russell's home. They were serving a warrant tied to a sexual assault allegation made by a former employee of the gold and silver pawn shop. What officers discovered inside went far beyond the original claim. Room after room revealed items that raised serious legal concerns. Police found 12 firearms, handguns, revolvers, rifles, and shotguns, some of them loaded. They uncovered marijuana, methamphetamine, drug paraphernalia, and large quantities of ammunition. Much of it was stored in a vault on the ground floor, though smaller amounts of drugs and clothing were scattered throughout the house. Chumlee later said the items were for personal use, but under the law, anyone using controlled substances could not legally possess firearms. Everything was seized. Authorities also obtained a warrant for a blood sample, believing drug use may have played a role in the alleged incident. Although the sexual assault claim was later dropped, the legal consequences had already taken shape. Chumlee faced 20 felony charges related to drug possession and weapons offenses. He spent one night in jail before posting a $62,000 bond. His attorney challenged the legality of the search, but the evidence was overwhelming. By May 2016, Chumlee accepted a plea deal to avoid prison. He pleaded guilty to 1 felony weapons charge and 1 misdemeanor count of attempted drug possession. The court sentenced him to 3 years of probation, mandatory counseling, and forfeiture of everything seized during the raid. If he stayed clean through 2019, the felony would be removed from his record, reduced to a misdemeanor. Any violation could have sent him to state prison for up to 5 years. Throughout the ordeal, the History Channel said nothing. Pawn Stars continued airing without acknowledgement. Industry insiders suggested the network deliberately kept its distance to protect the brand. Even with the assault allegation dismissed, the volume and severity of the charges made public commentary risky. Chumlee disappeared from appearances and interviews for months. Fans noticed the silence. The cameras kept rolling anyway. The show moved forward while one of its most recognizable faces dealt with consequences off-screen. Then came another loss that could not be ignored. On June 25, 2018, Richard Harrison, the old man, died at 77 after a long battle with Parkinson's disease. Viewers had watched his decline over the years, his movements slower, his voice quieter. Rick announced his death with a message that resonated deeply. He said he had lost a father, a friend, and a teacher all at once. The History Channel released a tribute of its own, thanking him for the wisdom and presence that helped turn a modest pawn shop into a Las Vegas landmark. Richard spent his final years at home, surrounded by family. When Pawn Stars returned after his death, the absence was unmistakable. Rick continued filming, but the grief lingered. After working side by side since 1989, the loss was written into every pause, every glance, something viewers could feel without a word being spoken. A year before his death, Richard Harrison made a decision that caught even longtime fans off guard. In 2017, he revised his will and deliberately excluded his youngest son, Christopher. The document was explicit in one detail. It stated that Richard loved Christopher, but also made clear that the omission was intentional. No explanation followed. Rick Harrison, named executor of the estate, described the matter as private. Speculation filled the silence. Some believed Christopher was already financially secure. Others suspected a long-standing emotional distance. The beneficiaries named in the updated will were Joseph and Joanne. The timing of the change, so close to Richard's final year, only deepened public curiosity and underscored the quiet fractures within the family. Those fractures widened in 2022. That year, Joanne Harrison, Rick's mother, filed a lawsuit against her own son. She accused Rick of deceiving her into signing away her 51% ownership stake in the pawn shop while she was hospitalized years earlier. According to the filing, Joanne had been in a coma at Valley Hospital around 2000 or 2001 and did not fully understand the documents placed before her. She claimed she never received proper records accounting for her equity, cash holdings, or silver assets. The lawsuit also pointed to a mysterious $3 million loan, which she believed had been taken out using her share as collateral. The court documents painted a painful portrait of a family strained by mistrust, unresolved grief, and financial disputes that surfaced after Richard's death. Then came a loss that eclipsed everything else. On January 19, 2024, Rick's son Adam was found unresponsive in a guest house in Las Vegas, where he had been living following a recent stay in jail. He was 39 years old. The Clark County coroner ruled the death accidental, caused by toxic levels of fentanyl and methamphetamine. Both substances were present in lethal amounts. Adam had struggled with addiction for years. Rehab attempts came and went. Each period of sobriety offered brief hope, followed by relapse. Rick later spoke openly about the cycle, about placing Adam in treatment repeatedly, watching him come out clean, and then watching him slip back again. In the end, Adam was trapped in a pattern he could not escape. His death sent a wave of grief through the family and placed them back under intense public attention as the nation reckoned with the expanding fentanyl crisis. Rick did not hide from the pain. He said there was no loss deeper than losing a child. He admitted he never imagined Adam's story would end that way. His honesty resonated with parents who had lived through similar tragedies. In those interviews, the story of addiction shifted from statistics to something deeply human, something that hollowed families out quietly over years. After Adam's death, Rick stepped into a role he had never expected. He became outspoken about fentanyl, calling for stronger border enforcement and harsher penalties for those who trafficked the drug. He argued that fentanyl was crossing borders with little resistance and described it as poison spreading unchecked. Rick went so far as to say that anyone caught selling fentanyl should face life in prison. He publicly praised what he viewed as effective border enforcement under a previous administration, claiming illegal crossings had once dropped by as much as 98%. His words pushed him into political conversations he had never sought before, adding his voice to a growing national debate shaped by loss. Then, in February 2025, another chapter quietly closed. Pawn Stars was placed on indefinite hiatus after 16 years and 23 seasons. The show's contract with the History Channel expired, and no renewal discussions followed. Rick confirmed there was no active agreement and no immediate plan to resume filming. For fans around the world, the announcement was jarring. The final season aired through April 2025, and then the series simply stopped. There was no farewell episode, no definitive ending, just silence. Months later, that uncertainty deepened. After filming wrapped in June 2025, Cory Harrison announced he was leaving the show and moving to Tulum, Mexico. He said that for years they had all been playing versions of themselves, and he no longer wanted to play a character. In Mexico, he embraced a quieter life and began exploring the idea of opening a barbecue restaurant. His departure removed one of the show's most familiar faces and left the future of the franchise even more unclear. Rick, however, did not abandon the idea entirely. He began pitching a reimagined version called Pawn Stars 2.0. He held discussions with multiple networks, including HBO. Nothing was finalized, but he remained hopeful. The concept was meant to rebuild the brand, possibly with a new format and a new cast. For longtime viewers, even the possibility suggested the story might not be over yet. By 2025, Rick Harrison's net worth was estimated at roughly $8 to $9 million. He had built it through real estate, restaurants, merchandise, paid appearances, publishing, and the pawn shop itself, which continued to draw thousands of visitors each year. Some public events paid him more than $1,000 per appearance. His book, License to Pawn, became a bestseller. The empire he assembled stood as proof of how far persistence could carry someone, even through repeated storms. But the weight of recent years was unmistakable. Joanne Harrison passed away in 2024 at the age of 85. Before her death, Rick had already buried his father. Then came the loss of his son. He also faced the legal fallout tied to his mother's estate. One by one, the losses stacked up. Still, Rick kept moving forward, balancing grief with obligation, trying to protect a legacy while the world around him continued to change.